So Goldman Sachs reported that 2026 to 2030 are going to be the golden years for acquisitions because of AI, low interest rates, and basically big companies wanting to buy innovation.
I think 2026 could be a record year for M&A.
And I should know about selling companies. I have sold 3 companies for multi-8 figures, and I've invested $4 million of my own personal money into new companies. So in this video, myself and Uncle Warren are going to tell you the 6 key decisions you should make if you want to sell your business in the next 36 months. Decision 4 and 5 are actually what so many people use to sell their companies to Google and Facebook for hundreds of millions every single year. Now, before we go into the 6 decisions, we have to understand, why would someone buy your company, right? There are 2 reasons why big companies buy smaller companies. The first one is capability. Basically, like, the small company knows how to do a certain thing that the big company says, we'd rather buy you than figuring out ourselves. And then the second one is something which is very obvious: customers. I.e., you have a set of customers and we can sell more of our stuff to your customers. Those are the only 2 reasons why it happens. Sometimes people buy because of talent and because of personnel, but the truth is, it is, you know how to do something we want to be able to do, and you know how to do already, so we're just going to buy you. Or you have customers that we can sell a bunch of stuff to, and so therefore we're just going to buy you so we can sell more stuff. Very simple, okay? So now we have that foundation. Let's now go into the 6 key decisions to make if you want to sell your company in the next 36 months. Now, the first one is actually something that is very counterintuitive, which is don't raise a ton of money. I know it sounds wild. I know everyone's talking about investments and fundraising, but here's what happens when you raise a ton of money. When you raise money and you're just trying to go for the biggest round possible, what happens is that you are outside of something called the buyer strike price. Now, what is the buyer strike price? Big companies, when they're buying companies, they have a corp dev team. Corp dev is just a fancy way of saying corporate development. It's people who buy companies. And typically, corporate development companies have a strike zone. And the strike zone is saying, if a company is between, let's say, 10 to 30 million, we buy it. But then if a company is valued over that, then we suddenly then are out of market. So many people price themselves out of market because they raise so much money that they need to sell for a much higher amount in order for their investors to approve the deal. What you don't want to do is be one of those. So what the best companies do, if you want to ensure that you are able to sell your business, is that you don't raise a ton of money, but you raise in stages. So maybe you start off with, you raise 150K in order to get your first few customers and prove that the market is there. Now, once you've got your first few customers, what you then do is that you then go into then raising another small round of maybe 250K to build out a sales team and a marketing machine which can predictably get customers. And then what you do is that you then raise a bit more, maybe 500K, to then build out the team. If you add up all of that, that's like less than $1 million, and you suddenly have built something which is predictable and repeatable. And at any point, you can then decide to sell. And there's a lot of people who will buy the company between 10 to 30 million. I'll actually tell you a very interesting story. So I have a friend, and he had a business which was a B2B SaaS business, and he actually had an offer to sell the business which would have made him personally 7 million. But because he had raised so much money from investors and it was all about getting this 100 million outcome, etc., the investors actually said no to that deal, because what would have happened is they could have sold, but then it would have been less than the 100 million target that they were going for. And so what happened was that he had to say no because the investors blocked it. And within 18 months, a bigger competitor came in and absolutely wiped them out, all because he raised too much money. So if you want to ensure that you give yourself the best chance in order to win in the next 36 months, don't raise too much money. Don't get caught in the hype of doing it. Just raise what you need so that you are in the buyer strike zone, and that's how you win. So the second key decision to make is to decide to go to more premium customers. Now, I know you've heard this before about getting to richer customers, but I want to explain why that's so important. Because when a buyer is looking at your business, the buyer is asking themselves, right? Like, can we sell more stuff to these customers? And are these customers going to be around for long enough for us to sell more stuff to them? And it's something I see so much is a lot of businesses that start selling to these startups and basically poorer customers. The problem with that is there's so much churn, and it's not as if they have a huge amount of budget, that if a big company were to buy you, it's almost like you have already maxed out the budget that smaller customer has. And so it's very important that you then think about going more premium. So I'll give you a very good lens for this. I have a method that I call the ABC customer method. So C customers are those who basically are like low startups, low price, low value. They're good at the beginning, but then you really can't build a significant business of them if you want to build something big and you don't want to raise a ton of funding. And then there are the B ones, who are the challenger people. They're the challengers to the A tier. So let's say that you were selling something to, I don't know, like a beauty brands, right? Your A tier might be something like Charlotte Tilbury or L'Oreal, but then your B tier might be the challengers to Charlotte Tilbury and L'Oreal. And then of course there's the A tier, who are the dons. Now, the way I'd like to think about this business is to simply ask myself a question, which is, can I get 10% of my customers to be A tier and then 90% of them to be B tier? Because the A tier ones are going to give you the credibility and the halo effect, but the B tier ones are going to be the ones that are going to keep spending with you over and over and over again. As soon as you can, start leaning into the B tier and the A tier ones for the case studies, because that's going to be the way you build a big business. Now, to bring this home, I'm going to actually give you a very good example. Let's say we both run a paid ads marketing agency, and I am serving B tier customers. So I'm serving people who maybe have between like 50 to 200 people. They are fast growing companies. Maybe they've raised a bit of funding, and so therefore they're more durable. And then what you are doing is you are serving companies who are less than 10 people. They are still relatively early. Maybe some of them are one-man bands. And we both actually build the business to $1 million a year. I am going to get a way higher valuation than you. I could sell my business for, say, 5 million, and you could sell your business for 2 million. Again, same revenue, same profit, all because of the customer profile. And so this is why, if you want to be able to sell your business in the next 36 months, actually increasing your customer quality and durability is so important. Do not ignore this, or otherwise you will potentially go to market or want to sell your business and buyers are going to say, actually these customers are not that great. Let's give you a really bad valuation. So that's two of the key decisions to make. Now, the third decision you have to make is build out your systems. Now, I know this. I'm not even going to labor the point on this. You know that you need these processes and methodologies in order to then sell your business. But I'm going to tell you a very specific thing. Do you remember earlier I said that companies are bought for two reasons? One is their capabilities, and then the second one is their customers. The first one about capabilities is basically a fancy way to say, you know how to do something in a certain way, and a buyer says, rather than us building it ourselves, we would just buy you. And so when people hear about building out systems and workflows, they think, wait, are you telling me that someone would buy effectively my Word document of how I do something? Yes. They actually will. And I know this because my last company, Fanbytes, one of the things we had was something called the Fanbytes way. It was this long document which just explained how we get customers, how we run campaigns, how we onboard influencers. It had everything there. And that was a big reason why BrainLab, the company bought us, were valuing us so high, because it was like, wow, you figured out a method over 5 years for how to do something. And so when people say stuff like build out SOPs or build out workflows, it's not just, so that you can buy your time back, etc. It's also because what you're building is a live, breathing document that eventually could make you millions and millions further down the line. Now, the fourth thing you have to do if you want to sell your business in the next 36 months is actually a sneaky trick. And it's a trick which at least 10 of my friends have used in order to sell their businesses for between 20 million and 50 million. And they predictably use it to the point where it kind of feels like cheating. So I'm going to tell you what it is, but you have to keep it between us. That doesn't make sense, just on YouTube. But anyway, so you have to keep it between us, which is to steal their checklist. Now, let me tell you something very interesting. Typically, the buyers in any industry are buyers who have bought several companies before. And what that therefore means is that they have a predictable playbook for how they buy companies. But that also means that you can figure out what that playbook is. And the most obvious thing, and this is going to be so crazy, is just to ask their advisors why they bought a certain company. That's it. So what a lot of my friends have done in the past is when they know they want to sell their business, after the first 1 or 2 years, they then write a list of who could potentially buy them. And then they go and see what M&A bank already did their deals. And then they go to that bank, they say, hey, let's go out for lunch. I eventually want to sell my company to the big brand. Can you tell me the checklist or the themes that they're looking for in order to then buy a company? Of course, the bankers are just like, sure, we'll tell you, because it's in their benefit. They're going to get a cut of the commission if you then decide to sell. And so what they then do is that they then reverse engineer the reason why something worked. They reverse engineer what that big brand wants, and then they start to actually then put that into their business and build it out. Now, I'm going to tell you a story that brings this to life. So this is a story about my friend who sold a luxury beauty brand to Kering. And Kering are actually the brand behind Gucci, Yves Saint Laurent, Balenciaga. And she planned for this way from the beginning of her business. So what she did about a year in, when she realized she had something, she then wrote down all potential acquirers, and then she looked at who were the bankers who helped with their deal. And then she just took them out to lunch and basically said, hey, I think your client here could be a potential buyer further down the line. What do they want to see? And in this case, the potential buyer was a company called Kering. Kering owned Gucci, Yves Saint Laurent, Balenciaga, and all these companies. And they told her, and they realized that there were certain themes that Kering were looking for, certain markets, certain regions. For example, they wanted to be really big in the Middle East. And so she started to carve that narrative there. They wanted to have a certain brand position amongst families, among like successful women. She started to then tell that story there. And then what happened is that within 4 years, she sold the company for $47 million. Now, she planned that out because she looked at the checklist of the buyer. And then once she had that, she then reverse engineered it and started to build it in. Now, the fifth thing to do if you want to sell your company in the next 36 months is to date your buyers. What do I mean by that? So one of the things that I've come to appreciate, having done so many of these deals, is something called the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule in terms of M&A is actually 80% of deals in any industry are done by 20% of the companies. So the biggest 20% of the companies are just those who are just funding so many of the deals. Now, what does that mean? It means that for you as the founder, you can just know that 20% and you can start to date them. Now, I'm not actually saying go on dates with them. If you want to, you can. But it actually means that you can go out and start forging partnerships and relationships with these people. It means that you can start to actually just see how you can integrate already before actually then potentially them buying you. A good example of this is actually a lot of marketing agencies. Before they sell to, let's say, a WPP or a publicist, who are the kind of 80-20 in the marketing space, you tend to find that they have already done like a campaign with them, or they've done some kind of webinar series with them. They've done something which gives both of them a feel for how they work together. And then eventually they're like, hey, this works very well. Can we think about buying you? And so the action point for you would be to write up your list of potential buyers and then say, what can I do to forge some kind of partnership with them? Because in doing so, I'm going to increase my likelihood of then being able to sell my business. You date your buyers before you ask them for marriage. All make sense? Great. The last key decision is when to sell. Now, this is something I see a lot of people get wrong, which is they sell when they've hit a certain revenue number, not when the market is hot. And when I say when the market is hot, is when you have people like investment banks and consultants and big guys like Goldman Sachs and Accenture and BCG saying, guys, this is the big theme. And the moment they say that, that's the point that you should now be thinking about selling your business. Because it's at that point that those big companies are going like, oh my God, this is a theme. We need to buy companies to fit that theme. And so for you as the founder, one of the most important things you should do is say, what are the biggest themes that are going on in my particular industry? And then how can I be part of that theme? So for example, if you are a beauty company, again, you might be like, well, everyone is talking about hyper personalized beauty. See how you can fit that into your narrative. Similar to Fanbytes, I realized that all the people were talking about influencer marketing being the next wave. And I was like, ooh, now is the time to then sell the business. Timing is the most important factor to you being able to sell your business. So read the research report, understand what the waves are, and the moment that you see that, give yourself a 12-month gap to then say, right, now at this time is when to sell. To make this more concrete, I'm going to tell you a story. Now, this story is of two marketing agencies. One of them is doing 10 million a year, the other is doing 5 million a year. The 10 million a year business has really good profits. 5 million a year business also has really good profits. Now, that 10 million a year business, that business doesn't have anything that is part of the wave. It is just a standard marketing agency. It doesn't really use AI. It doesn't have anything that big companies want. The 5 million a year agency, however, that one is using AI, is talking about AI on LinkedIn, is talking about how it's using it for its clients, etc. And they both go to sell their business. The 5 million agency got an offer for 23 million. The 10 million agency got an offer for 16 million. I know these two companies, and I know that they were actually competing for the exact same buyer. But the buyer decided to take the one which was part of the wave, part of the narrative. It valued it more because currently the narrative around AI and marketing services is hot. That just shows you the importance of timing and making sure that you are part of a wave. So those are the 6 key decisions that you need to make in order to sell your business in the next 36 months. If you want more source to sell your business, then watch this video here. And if you want more source to grow your business, you can watch this video here. Enjoy the source, make more money. Uncle Warren and I. Peace.